For a long time, the history of North America before the arrival of Europeans has been told as a simple and misleading story. According to this outdated narrative, the continent was populated only by small, scattered tribes of hunters and gatherers, living in harmony with nature but lacking complex societies, advanced knowledge, or monumental architecture. Cities, pyramids, priesthoods, and scientific traditions were believed to belong exclusively to Egypt, Mesopotamia, or Mesoamerica, not to the lands north of Mexico. And yet, hidden beneath forests, farmland, and modern cities lies another story. Across the eastern half of what is now the United States, thousands of massive earthworks still exist or once existed. Enormous mounds of soil carefully shaped and precisely aligned. Some rise like stepped pyramids above river valleys. Others form perfect circles, squares, and octagons visible only from the sky. These structures were not accidental. They were not simple burial heaps. They were the sacred centers of entire civilizations. Today, we call the people who built them the mound builders, a collective term used by archaeologists to describe several related cultures that flourished in North America for more than 2,000 years. Among the most important of these cultures were the Adena, the Hopewell, and later the Mississippian civilization. Together, they created one of the most sophisticated and least understood traditions of monument building in the ancient world. The comparison to pyramids is not poetic exaggeration. Like the pyramids of Egypt or the temple platforms of the Maya, North American mounds were symbols of power, religion, and cosmic order. They required vast amounts of organized labor, deep spiritual motivation, and advanced knowledge of engineering, astronomy, and landscape design. Some mounds contain the remains of elite individuals. Others served as platforms for temples, council houses, or the residences of divine rulers. Still others were aligned with the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, functioning as calendars carved directly into the earth. What makes this story even more remarkable is its scale. At their height, mound-building cultures constructed tens of thousands of earthworks. Entire ceremonial landscapes stretched for kilometers. Trade networks connected the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico and the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic coast. Copper, obsidian, shells, and rare stones moved across the continent, linking distant communities through shared rituals and beliefs. And yet, when Europeans arrived, many of these civilizations were already in decline or had collapsed entirely. Disease, climate change, environmental pressure, and internal conflict had weakened them long before sustained contact. As a result, Europeans encountered only fragments of what once existed, and often misunderstood what they saw. In the centuries that followed, countless mounds were destroyed by farming, looting, and urban expansion. Others were explained away by racist pseudoscience, which claimed that Native Americans were incapable of building such monuments. Modern archaeology has overturned these myths. We now know that the mounds were the achievements of indigenous peoples, highly organized societies with complex religions, powerful leaders, and a deep understanding of the natural and cosmic worlds. Their history forces us to rethink what civilization looks like and to question the idea that writing, stone architecture, or empires are the only markers of advanced human culture. In this lecture, we will explore the lost pyramid civilizations of North America. We will begin with the Adena, the earliest large-scale mound builders, who laid the spiritual and architectural foundations of the tradition. We will then move to the Hopewell, whose vast networks of exchange and precise geometric earthworks reveal a continent-wide religious system. Finally, we will examine the Mississippian civilization, builders of true cities and massive platform mounds, including Cahokia, the largest urban center north of Mexico before Columbus. Together, these cultures tell a powerful story, a story of Earth transformed into sacred space, of knowledge passed without writing, and of civilizations that rose, flourished, and faded, leaving behind monuments made not of stone, but of soil, memory, and silence. 2. The Adena culture, the birth of the mound-building tradition. The story of North America's mound-building civilizations begins quietly, long before cities, kings, or massive ceremonial centers dominated the landscape. Around 1000 BCE, in the fertile valleys of the Ohio River and its tributaries, a new cultural tradition began to emerge. Today, archaeologists call this tradition the Adena culture, named after an estate in Ohio where one of their mounds was first studied in the 19th century. The Adena were not an empire. They had no cities in the later sense, no written language, and no centralized government. Yet what they created marked a profound turning point in the history of indigenous North America. For the first time on a large scale, human communities began to reshape the land itself into sacred architecture. 1. Environment and way of life. The Adena lived in a landscape defined by rivers, forests, and rich floodplains. These environments provided abundant food: deer, fish, wild plants, nuts, and early forms of agriculture, including squash and sunflower. The Adena were semi-sedentary. They did not wander endlessly, but they were not fully urban either. Small villages and seasonal camps formed a network of communities connected by kinship and ritual. This way of life allowed for something new: long-term planning. Building a mound was not the work of a single generation. It required stability, cooperation, and shared belief. People had to believe that what they were building mattered not only now, but far into the future. 2. The first mounds. Adena mounds were primarily burial mounds, but they were far more than graves. These earthworks were carefully constructed in layers, sometimes over centuries. A body might be placed in a prepared space, accompanied by ritual objects, and then covered with earth. Later, the mound would be reopened to receive another burial, and expanded again. Some mounds reached impressive sizes, rising several meters high and stretching wide across the landscape. Others were modest, but their placement was never random. They often occupied prominent locations: hilltops, river terraces, or places visible from afar. In a world without stone temples, the mound itself became a sacred mountain. 3. Death, ritual, and social hierarchy. Not everyone was buried in an Adena mound. The individuals interred within them were often members of a social or spiritual elite. Their graves contained finely crafted objects: copper bracelets, stone pipes carved into animal or human forms, necklaces made from distant shells, and sheets of mica that shimmered in the light. These objects tell us two important things. First, Adena society was not egalitarian. Certain people held special status, likely spiritual leaders, shamans, or chiefs. Second, the Adena were already connected to distant regions through exchange networks. Copper came from the Great Lakes. Shells arrived from the Gulf Coast. The mound was both a tomb and a display of power. Rituals surrounding death were complex and symbolic. Red ochre, associated with blood, life, and rebirth, was commonly used in burials. This suggests that death was not seen as an end, but as a transformation, a passage into another realm. 4. Earthworks and sacred geometry. While burial mounds were the most common Adena structures, they were not the only ones. The Adena also built circular enclosures, embankments, and causeways. These earthworks defined sacred spaces where ceremonies likely took place. Circles, in many indigenous cosmologies, represent cycles of seasons of life and death of the sun and moon. By shaping the earth into these forms, the Adena were expressing a worldview in which humanity, nature, and the cosmos were deeply interconnected. Though simpler than later Hopewell geometry, these early earthworks laid the conceptual foundation for monumental landscape design. 5. Technology and knowledge. The Adena built their mounds using simple tools, baskets, wooden digging sticks, and human labor. There were no beasts of burden, no metal tools, and no wheels. And yet, the precision of construction suggests careful planning and accumulated experience. Knowledge was passed orally and ritually. Skills in engineering, symbolism, and ceremony were preserved not in texts, but in tradition and practice. Each mound was a lesson, a memory, and a sacred obligation. 6. The legacy of the Adena. By around 200 CE, the Adena culture began to change. Communities grew larger, rituals more elaborate, and connections between regions more intense. Rather than disappearing, Adena traditions evolved, giving rise to what archaeologists would later call the Hopewell culture. The true legacy of the Adena lies not in their size or power, but in what they made possible. They introduced the idea that Earth itself could be shaped into sacred architecture. They established burial rituals that linked power, spirituality, and the landscape. And they began a tradition that would transform North America into a continent of monuments. The mounds of the Adena were the first steps toward an indigenous civilization of pyramids, built not of stone, but of soil, belief, and time. 3. The Hopewell culture networks of ritual, trade, and cosmic order. By the last centuries before the Common Era, the quiet foundations laid by the Adena had grown into something far more ambitious. Across the river valleys of the Ohio and Mississippi basins, a new cultural phenomenon emerged, one that connected distant regions, standardized sacred practices, and transformed mound building into a continental system of meaning. Archaeologists call this phenomenon the Hopewell culture, named after a site in Ohio where its artifacts were first identified. Hopewell was not a single nation or empire. There was no capital, no standing army, and no centralized ruler governing vast territory. Instead, Hopewell was a shared religious and ceremonial tradition, binding together hundreds of communities through ritual, symbolism, and exchange. This power did not lie in conquest, but in belief. 1. From local tradition to continental system. Unlike the Adena, whose influence was largely regional, the Hopewell phenomenon stretched across much of eastern North America. From the Great Lakes to Florida, from the plains to the Appalachian Mountains, communities participated in a common ceremonial world. What unified them was not language or ethnicity, but ritual practice. Certain burial customs, artistic styles, and mound-building techniques appear again and again across vast distances. This suggests that Hopewell sites functioned as pilgrimage centers, places people traveled to, participated in ceremonies, and then returned home carrying shared symbols and ideas. 2. The Hopewell interaction sphere. One of the most astonishing aspects of Hopewell society is the scale of its exchange networks, often called the Hopewell interaction sphere. Materials found in Hopewell mounds came from thousands of kilometers away: obsidian from the Rocky Mountains, copper from the Great Lakes, marine shells from the Gulf of Mexico, mica from the Appalachian Mountains, silver and rare stones from distant regions. These materials were not everyday goods. They were sacred substances, transformed into ritual objects. Finely worked copper ears pools, obsidian blades too fragile for combat, shell gorgets engraved with powerful symbols. Trade in this context was not primarily economic. It was spiritual exchange. Objects carried meaning, identity, and cosmological power. Through them, distant communities became part of a single sacred network. 3. Monumental geometry and sacred landscapes. Hopewell earthworks represent one of the most sophisticated examples of prehistoric landscape design anywhere in the world. Unlike the often rounded Adena mounds, Hopewell builders created vast geometric enclosures, circles, squares, and octagons, sometimes covering hundreds of acres. Sites such as the Newark earthworks in Ohio display a level of precision that continues to astonish researchers. Walls of earth, several meters high, form shapes so exact that their proportions can be measured mathematically even today. These were not fortifications. They enclosed ceremonial spaces, processional routes, and ritual grounds. The labor required to build these complexes was immense. Entire communities must have participated, returning year after year to maintain and expand the earthworks. This was architecture meant to endure not through stone, but through continuity of culture. 4. Astronomy and cosmic alignment. Many Hopewell earthworks appear to be aligned with celestial events. Certain enclosures correspond to the solstices, equinoxes, and even the complex cycles of the moon. At Newark, for example, the octagonal earthwork aligns with the northernmost rising point of the moon, an event that occurs only once every 18.6 years. This suggests that Hopewell priests or ritual specialists possessed detailed astronomical knowledge. The sky was not separate from the earth. It was mirrored within it. By walking through these geometric spaces, participants were symbolically moving through the cosmos itself. The mounds and enclosures thus functioned as calendars, temples, and teaching tools, embedding cosmic order into the landscape. 5. Ritual authority and social structure. Hopewell society did not rely on kings or monumental palaces. Power was expressed through ritual authority rather than political domination. Certain individuals, likely shamans, astronomer priests, or lineage leaders, held knowledge that connected the human world to the spiritual one. Burials within Hopewell mounds often contain extraordinary objects, but they are relatively few. This suggests that elite status was rare and carefully defined. Leadership was likely situational and ceremonial, activated during rituals rather than enforced through permanent rule. In this way, Hopewell represents an alternative model of civilization, one organized around shared meaning rather than centralized control. 6. Art, symbolism, and the sacred world. Hopewell art is rich with symbolism. Human figures, birds of prey, serpents, bears, and abstract forms appear again and again. These images likely represent spiritual beings, clan symbols, or mythological narratives. One of the most striking motifs is the serpent, associated with water, fertility, and the underworld. The famous Great Serpent Mound, though possibly built later, reflects ideas that were already present in Hopewell cosmology. Art was not decorative. It was functional magic designed to mediate between worlds. 7. The decline of the Hopewell tradition. Around 500 CE, the Hopewell ceremonial system began to fade. Large-scale mound construction decreased. Long-distance exchange networks weakened. Communities became more localized and self-sufficient. The reasons remain debated. Environmental changes, shifts in belief, social reorganization, and population movements likely all played a role. What is clear is that Hopewell did not collapse in violence or conquest. Transformed. Out of this transformation would emerge new societies, more agricultural, more hierarchical, and more urban. The spiritual landscapes of Hopewell would give way to something new and powerful: the rise of the Mississippian civilization. 4. The Mississippian civilization, cities, power, and earth pyramids. Around the beginning of the second millennium, the cultural landscape of North America underwent a dramatic transformation. The decentralized ritual networks of the Hopewell world gave way to something far more concentrated and visibly powerful. Across the river valleys of the Mississippi, Ohio, Tennessee, and their tributaries, large population centers emerged, true cities by pre-Columbian standards. At their hearts rose enormous platform mounds, reshaping the skyline and redefining the relationship between power, religion, and space. This was the age of the Mississippian civilization. 1. The agricultural revolution and population growth. At the core of Mississippian society was a new economic foundation: intensive agriculture, especially the large-scale cultivation of maize or corn. While earlier cultures had practiced small-scale farming, maize agriculture allowed for surplus food production on an unprecedented level. Surplus meant population growth. Villages expanded into towns and towns into cities. Social roles became specialized: farmers, artisans, warriors, priests, and rulers. For the first time in North America north of Mexico, urban life became a defining feature of society. Rivers functioned as highways, enabling transport, communication, and control across vast territories. The Mississippian world was not isolated. It was interconnected, dynamic, and competitive. 2. The rise of mound cities. Mississippian cities were carefully planned. At their center stood a large plaza, an open ceremonial space. Surrounding the plaza were platform mounds, flat-topped earth pyramids that supported temples, council houses, or the residences of elites. These mounds were not burial structures in the Adena or Hopewell sense. They were living monuments, continuously rebuilt and enlarged. Each new layer symbolized renewal, legitimacy, and continuity of power. The most famous of these cities was Cahokia, located near modern-day St. Louis. At its peak around 1100 to 1200 CE, Cahokia covered more than 6 square miles and may have housed 20,000 to 40,000 people, making it larger than London at the same time. 3. Monk's Mound, the largest earth pyramid in North America. Dominating Cahokia was Monk's Mound, the largest prehistoric earthwork in the Americas. Rising over 30 meters high and containing millions of cubic meters of soil, it rivals the Great Pyramid of Giza in volume. At the summit stood a massive wooden structure, likely a temple or the residence of a divine ruler. From this elevated position, leaders quite literally looked down upon the city, a physical manifestation of social hierarchy. Monk's Mound was not just architecture. It was political theology made visible, asserting that power flowed from the sacred realm to the human world through the ruler. 4. Kingship, religion, and sacred authority. Unlike the Hopewell, Mississippian societies were highly stratified. Power was centralized in the hands of hereditary elites, often described as chiefs or kings. These rulers were not merely political leaders. They were sacred figures, believed to maintain balance between the worlds. Religion and governance were inseparable. Temples atop mounds served as places of ritual, sacrifice, and ceremony. Public rituals reinforced social order, linking agricultural cycles, cosmic events, and political authority. Iconography from the period, known as the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex, depicts warriors, birdmen, solar symbols, and mythic beings. These images reveal a rich cosmology centered on a three-tiered universe: the upper world of the sky, the middle world of humans, and the underworld of water and chaos. 5. Astronomy and control of time. Like their predecessors, Mississippian builders closely observed the heavens. At Cahokia, a series of wooden posts arranged in circles, known today as Woodhenge, functioned as solar calendars. From specific points within the city, the sun could be seen rising over key mounds during solstices and equinoxes. This allowed priests to determine planting times, ritual calendars, and festival dates. Control of time was control of society. Those who could predict celestial events held immense authority. In this sense, Mississippian rulers were also scientists, guardians of cosmic knowledge. 6. Daily life and social tensions. Life in Mississippian cities was vibrant but demanding. Densely packed populations placed strain on resources. Fields had to be cleared, forests cut, and rivers managed. As cities grew, so did social inequality. Archaeological evidence suggests periods of violence, warfare, and fortification. Palisades surrounded many cities. Elite burials show signs of ritual sacrifice, including the burial of retainers alongside powerful individuals. Power came at a cost, both ecological and human. 7. Decline and transformation. By the 14th and 15th centuries, many Mississippian centers began to decline. The reasons were complex and interconnected: environmental degradation, overpopulation, climate instability during the Little Ice Age, internal conflict, and disease. When Europeans arrived, they encountered only the remnants of this world. Some Mississippian societies survived in transformed forms, becoming the ancestors of historic tribes such as the Natchez, Choctaw, Creek, and others. The great cities were abandoned. The mounds remained, silent, immense, and misunderstood. V. Comparing the mound builders to other ancient civilizations. When we think of ancient civilizations, certain images immediately come to mind. The stone pyramids of Egypt, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the towering temples of the Maya, or the imperial cities of China. For centuries, these cultures have defined what civilization is supposed to look like. Writing systems, monumental stone architecture, and centralized empires have become the standard by which all ancient societies are measured. The mound-building cultures of North America challenge this standard. Though they left no written texts and built with earth rather than stone, the Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippian civilizations fulfilled the same fundamental roles as their Old World counterparts, often in strikingly similar ways. 1. Mounds and pyramids, different materials, same purpose. At first glance, a North American earth mound may seem less impressive than a stone pyramid. But this impression fades when we consider function rather than material. Like pyramids, mounds were sacred centers linking heaven, earth, and the underworld, symbols of power and legitimacy visible across the landscape, products of organized labor requiring leadership and planning. Monk's Mound at Cahokia contains more construction material than many Egyptian pyramids. Its form, a massive stepped platform rising above the city, served the same ideological purpose as a pyramid or ziggurat, to elevate the sacred above the ordinary world. The choice of earth was not a limitation. It was a cultural decision. Earth was alive, sacred, and renewable. Rebuilding a mound was a ritual act, a renewal of cosmic order. 2. Power without empires. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, the mound builders did not create vast territorial empires. Their authority was often localized or ritual-based, especially in the Adena and Hopewell periods. This does not indicate weakness. Rather, it reflects a different political philosophy, one where power flowed from spiritual knowledge, lineage, and ceremonial authority instead of military conquest. The Mississippian world came closer to Old World state systems, with hierarchical leadership, urban centers, and regional dominance. Yet even then, power was inseparable from religion and cosmology. 3. Science without writing. One of the most striking aspects of mound-building cultures is their scientific knowledge, achieved without written records. Hopewell and Mississippian builders tracked solar cycles, lunar standstills, seasonal changes, agricultural timing. Their astronomical alignments rival those found at Stonehenge or in Maya cities. Knowledge was preserved not in books, but in landscapes. The earth itself became a teaching instrument, encoding time, space, and meaning for cities that looked different but functioned the same. Mississippian cities like Cahokia functioned as political, economic, and religious hubs, just as cities did elsewhere in the ancient world. They had planned layouts, central plazas, monumental architecture, social stratification, specialized labor. They simply followed a different aesthetic logic, one rooted in wood, earth, and seasonal renewal rather than stone permanence. 5. Rethinking the definition of civilization. If civilization is defined not by stone and writing, but by complex social organization, monumental construction, shared ideology, and scientific understanding, then the mound builders clearly qualify. Their achievements force us to expand our understanding of human ingenuity. Civilization can take many forms, and some of the most remarkable ones were built quietly, from soil and belief, in the heart of North America. 6. European contact and the destruction of a legacy. By the time Europeans first set foot in the interior of North America, the great age of mound-building civilizations was already fading. Many cities had been abandoned. Sacred centers had fallen silent. Yet the descendants of the Mississippian world were still there, living in complex societies, maintaining ancient traditions, and moving through landscapes shaped by thousands of years of history. What followed would permanently alter that world. 1. First encounters and invisible catastrophe. The earliest European expeditions into the Mississippi Valley, such as those led by Hernando de Soto in the 16th century, encountered indigenous societies that still bore the imprint of Mississippian culture. Chiefs ruled from elevated platforms. Towns were organized around plazas. Ritual authority remained strong. But long before sustained colonization began, a devastating force spread faster than any army: disease. Smallpox, measles, influenza, and other Old World illnesses swept through native populations that had no immunity. Entire communities collapsed within generations. Social systems fractured. Oral traditions were interrupted. Cities were abandoned not because their people forgot how to build them, but because too many had died. This demographic collapse erased much of the living memory of mound-building traditions. 2. The disappearance of the cities. When later European settlers moved inland, they found vast mounds rising from fields and forests, but no great cities surrounding them. Without understanding their origins, settlers assumed the mounds were the work of some mysterious, vanished people. In reality, the builders had not vanished. Their societies had transformed under extreme pressure. Survivors reorganized into smaller, more mobile communities, adapting to a world reshaped by catastrophe. The silence of the mounds was misinterpreted as evidence of disappearance rather than survival. 3. The myth of the lost race. In the 18th and 19th centuries, a dangerous myth took hold in American thought. The idea that the mounds had been built by a lost, non-native civilization, often imagined as white, biblical, or Old World in origin. This myth served a purpose. If Native Americans were not the creators of the mounds, then they could be portrayed as intruders on land that did not truly belong to them. Despite overwhelming archaeological evidence, these ideas persisted for decades, shaping public opinion and policy. It was not until the late 19th century that the Smithsonian Institution formally demonstrated that the mounds were built by indigenous peoples. The damage, however, had already been done. 4. Physical destruction of the mounds. As settlers expanded westward, mounds were seen as obstacles rather than heritage. Thousands were flattened for farmland, looted for artifacts, destroyed to make bricks, roads, and buildings. Entire ceremonial landscapes vanished beneath plows and cities. What had taken centuries to build was erased in years. Only a fraction of the original mound complexes survive today. 5. Rediscovery and modern archaeology. In the 20th and 21st centuries, archaeology began to recover what had been lost, not physically but intellectually. New methods such as aerial photography, geophysical surveys, and LiDAR revealed hidden earthworks beneath forests and modern development. Researchers uncovered the sophistication of indigenous engineering, astronomy, and social organization. Just as importantly, native nations began reclaiming their histories, asserting cultural continuity with the mound builders. Today, mounds are no longer viewed as relics of a mysterious past, but as the living heritage of indigenous peoples. 7. The meaning of the mound builders today. Today, the mounds still rise from the landscape, some protected and studied, others hidden beneath forests, suburbs, and highways. They are no longer the centers of political power they once were, yet their meaning has not faded. Instead, it has deepened. For modern indigenous nations, the mounds are not ruins of a lost people. They are ancestral places. Many native communities trace their cultural, spiritual, and historical roots directly to the mound-building societies of the past. The mounds affirm continuity, a living connection between ancient worlds and the present. In recent decades, Indigenous voices have become increasingly central in archaeological research and preservation. Tribal historians, elders, and scholars have challenged older interpretations that stripped the mounds of spiritual meaning. For them, these sites are not merely objects of study. They are sacred landscapes that demand respect. Beyond indigenous communities, the mounds challenge the broader public to rethink American history. They reveal that North America was not an empty wilderness awaiting civilization. It was a continent shaped by human hands, ideas, and beliefs long before European arrival. The mounds also reshape how we define progress. Built without metal tools, beasts of burden, or writing, they stand as evidence that human intelligence expresses itself in many forms. Knowledge does not always leave books behind. Sometimes it leaves landscapes. In an age of environmental crisis, the mound builders offer a powerful lesson. Their architecture worked with the land rather than against it. Earth was shaped, not conquered. Sacred space was created through participation, renewal, and collective responsibility. Preserving the mounds today is not just about protecting the past. It is about honoring alternative ways of understanding power, knowledge, and humanity's relationship with the world. 8. Conclusion: Earth, Memory, and Forgotten Pyramids. The story of the mound builders is not one of mystery, but of misunderstanding. For more than 2,000 years, the Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippian cultures transformed North America into a continent of sacred architecture. They built monumental landscapes aligned with the heavens. They organized vast networks of exchange and belief. They created cities, governed societies, and encoded cosmic knowledge into the earth itself. Their pyramids were not made of stone, but of soil, layered by generations, renewed through ritual, and infused with meaning. These structures were not designed to last forever in material form, but to endure through memory and tradition. Colonization, disease, and destruction silenced much of that tradition. Yet the mounds remain. They rise quietly from the land, asking us to look again, to question what we think we know about civilization, progress, and history. They remind us that greatness does not always announce itself in stone monuments or written words. Sometimes it is written in the shape of the earth. The lost pyramid civilizations of North America were never truly lost. They were simply waiting to be seen.